David Matthews had lived in his suburban home for over 5 years without incident. A 38-year-old software developer who worked remotely even before the pandemic made it common, David took pride in his modest three-bedroom ranch-style house in the Oak Ridge Estates subdivision. He and his wife Emma had chosen the neighborhood specifically for its good schools and family-friendly atmosphere. Their children, Zoe, 10, and Mason, 7, had thrived there, making friends up and down the cul-de-sac where they lived. This past May, as temperatures began climbing earlier than usual for their region, David noticed his children pressed against the windows of air-conditioned homes, watching with envy as the Petersons across the street enjoyed their in-ground pool, a luxury the Matthews family couldn't afford with braces for Zoe and Mason's growing collection of medical bills from his asthma treatments. "Dad, it's so hot," Zoe complained one evening as the family ate dinner on their modest deck. "Everyone else gets to swim." "Not everyone," David corrected gently, though he understood her exaggeration. It was Emma who first suggested the above-ground pool, showing David options on her tablet during their after-dinner coffee. "It's not as expensive as I thought," she said, "and the kids would be over the moon." David spent the next week researching his options thoroughly. He reviewed local ordinances and HOA regulations, downloaded permit applications, and even consulted their home insurance agent about potential changes to their policy. He chose a 15-foot diameter model with a sturdy frame and quality liner that promised several seasons of use with proper maintenance. Before placing the order, David printed simple notification letters for his adjacent neighbors. He hand-delivered them one Saturday morning, explaining his plans and offering to answer any questions. Most neighbors responded with enthusiasm or indifference, all except Patricia Winters, whose meticulously maintained Tudor-style home shared a fence line with the Matthews backyard. "Above ground," she had repeated, her nose wrinkling slightly as she accepted his letter. "Well, I suppose it's better than those inflatable eyesores. Just make sure it doesn't leak onto my property." The pool arrived in 3 large boxes the following weekend. David enlisted his brother-in-law Mike to help with the installation, and they spent Saturday leveling the ground and laying the protective base. Sunday was devoted to assembling the frame, securing the liner, and beginning the slow process of filling it. The children hovered nearby, alternating between helping and asking every 15 minutes if it was ready yet. By Memorial Day weekend, the pool was finally complete. David had added a small deck along one side, giving the family a proper place to enter and exit without trampling the grass. He installed a lockable gate to prevent neighborhood children from accessing it unsupervised, a precaution both for safety and liability reasons. Emma had purchased colorful solar-powered lights to string around the deck rails, giving the backyard a festive atmosphere on warm evenings. The first time Zoe and Mason jumped in, their shrieks of delight made all the effort worthwhile. Throughout June and July, the Matthews backyard became the center of their family life. Emma worked from a shaded patio table while the children splashed. David often joined them after logging off work, cannonballing into the water to his children's delight. They hosted modest weekend barbecues where neighborhood friends came to swim, their parents chatting over cold drinks while children rotated in and out of the water. Patricia Winters had lived in Oak Ridge Estates for nearly 15 years, long enough to see the neighborhood transform from an exclusive enclave to what she often called just another suburb in her frequent HOA meeting speeches. At 57, Patricia occupied her spacious 4-bedroom Tudor-style home alone since her divorce 6 years prior. Her adult son visited on holidays, usually for brief lunches that ended with him checking his watch. Neighbors often observed that her garden received more affection than her family ever seemed to. When Patricia wasn't tending to her award-winning roses or polishing the brass fixtures on her front door, she patrolled the neighborhood with eagle eyes. The HOA board had grown weary of her emails documenting garbage bins left out past 6 p.m. or mailboxes painted unapproved shades of black. The nickname Karen had emerged 3 summers ago when she called animal control on the Reynolds family's new puppy for excessive vocalization during quiet hours. The name stuck, though never to her face. Patricia had largely tolerated the Matthews family before the pool. They were quiet, kept their lawn mowed, and their holiday decorations fell within HOA guidelines. But the pool changed everything for her. What began as tight-lipped disapproval evolved into a summer-long campaign against what she termed the aquatic eyesore. "I'm trying to enjoy my garden meditation," Patricia called over the fence one June afternoon, her voice carried on the breeze to Emma, who was supervising the children's swim. "But all I hear is splashing and screaming. Did you know constant noise exposure reduces property values by up to 7%? David installed a decibel monitoring app after Patricia left a printout of the local noise ordinance in their mailbox highlighted in yellow. The children never exceeded the limits, but Patricia wasn't satisfied. She began documenting pool usage in a leather-bound notebook she carried on her constitutional walks around the neighborhood. 4 neighborhood children at Matthews Pool, 2:17 p.m. Thursday, No visible adult supervision, she recited into her phone's voice memo app loud enough for Emma, who was sitting on the deck with a clear view of the pool, to hear. By mid-July, Patricia's tactics escalated. David spotted her standing on a garden stool, pointing her phone camera over the fence during Zoe's birthday party. He politely waved, which flustered Patricia enough that she nearly toppled from her perch. "Just documenting the water level," she explained unconvincingly. "I'm concerned about West Nile virus from standing water, you understand." At the July HOA meeting, Patricia arrived with a 3-ring binder labeled Neighborhood Concerns, Aquatic Edition. She presented a 10-minute slideshow featuring zoomed-in photos of the Matthews pool, charts of property values in neighborhoods with and without visible recreational equipment, and a petition signed by exactly 3 residents, all from the far side of the development, none of whom could possibly see the Matthews backyard. HOA President Gerald Thompson cut her presentation short. "Patricia, the Matthews family received proper approval. The pool meets all requirements. Requirements can be changed," Patricia countered, sniffing indignantly. When August brought a week-long heat wave, the Matthews invited several neighbors with young children to use their pool during the hottest afternoon hours. Patricia documented each visitor, taking notes from behind her kitchen window, which offered a partial view of their backyard. She left voicemails for David citing capacity concerns and liability issues, though she never specified which regulations she believed they were violating. One evening, David found a printout of swimming pool-related lawsuits tucked under his windshield wiper in the grocery store parking lot. There was no signature, but the paper was the same lavender shade Patricia used for her HOA newsletters. Labor Day weekend marked the unofficial end of summer in Oak Ridge Estates. School would start the following Tuesday, and the neighborhood pool had already reduced its hours. The Matthews family decided to host one final pool party on Sunday afternoon, casual gathering with hot dogs on the grill and a cooler of popsicles for the children. David noticed Patricia peering through her blinds throughout the afternoon. When the last guest departed around 6 p.m., she emerged from her house to collect her mail, timing her walk perfectly to pass by their driveway. "I'd assume that's the last of the aquatic disturbances for the year," she called out, her tone falsely pleasant. "The kids start school Tuesday," Emma replied neutrally, carrying empty paper plates to the trash. Patricia nodded with obvious satisfaction. "Good. Perhaps the neighborhood can return to its natural tranquility." That evening, as David and Emma cleaned up from the party, they discussed the pool's winter fate. Emma had already researched winter pool covers and maintenance chemicals. The instruction manual recommends complete disassembly for above-ground pools and climates with freezing temperatures, David said, flipping through the manufacturer's booklet while they sat on the couch. "It says leaving it up can cause warping and shorten the pool's lifespan." Emma sighed, looking at the photos she'd taken throughout the summer. "The kids love it so much. Mason's asthma attacks were down too. I think the swimming strengthened his lungs." "We'll set it up again next year," David assured her. "But we should probably take it down before the first frost. The garage has enough space if we organize a bit." They checked the long-range forecast and marked the following Saturday on their calendar. David requested time off work to tackle the project, and Emma planned to take the children to her sister's house to keep them occupied during the dismantling. "They'll be heartbroken watching it come down," she explained to her sister during their weekly phone call. "Better if they're not here for that part." Friday evening, David organized the garage, clearing space for the disassembled pool components. He researched proper drainage protocols to ensure he wouldn't flood their yard or neighboring properties. The pool would need to drain slowly into their backyard, where the slightly sloped terrain would channel the water toward the storm drain at the edge of their property, away from Patricia's pristinely landscaped yard. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill to confirm they'd made the right decision. Emma drove off with Zoe and Mason around 9 a.m., promising a day of cousin time and ice cream to soften the blow of the pool's seasonal departure. David began by disconnecting the filter system and removing the ladder. He carefully set up a siphon system using garden hoses to slowly drain the water. According to his calculations, the draining process would take several hours, giving him time to organize tools and prepare the storage containers for the liner and frame. As the water level gradually dropped, David dismantled the small deck he'd built, sorting screws and brackets into labeled containers for easy reassembly next year. He took photos of each step to guide him in the spring and made notes about improvements he might make for the next season, perhaps a larger deck area or a better filtration system. By noon, the pool was half drained, and David took a quick break for lunch. Sitting on his back porch with a sandwich, he glanced over at Patricia's house and noticed her curtains were drawn. Unusual for a Saturday when she typically gardened or washed her windows. He shrugged it off and returned to work, unaware that his practical end-of-season maintenance was about to trigger a neighborhood spectacle. By early afternoon, the pool was nearly drained with just a few inches of water remaining. David had laid out all the components in the frame in neat rows on tarps in the backyard, organizing them for efficient storage. The temperature had risen to a pleasant 70 degrees, warm enough to work comfortably in a t-shirt but cool enough to confirm summer had definitely passed. David was using a plastic cup to bail out the last puddles of water from the liner's creases when he felt the distinct sensation of being watched. He looked up to find Patricia standing at the fence line, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wore her gardening gloves and sun hat, though her pristine outfit suggested she hadn't actually been gardening. "What do you think you're doing?" Patricia demanded, her voice sharp enough to startle a nearby robin into flight. David straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Hey, Patricia, just taking down the pool for the season." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the dismantled frame components, taking it down. "But why would you do that?" "We always plan to," David explained, confused by her reaction. "It's getting too cold for swimming, and the manufacturer recommends winter storage in our climate. Freezing and thawing can damage the liner and frame." Patricia stepped closer to the fence, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the wooden slats. "But that's not acceptable." David blinked, genuinely puzzled. After a summer of complaints about the pool, Patricia's sudden objection to its removal made no sense. "I understand," he said carefully. "I thought you'd be pleased to see it go." "That's beside the point," Patricia snapped. "The pool has become a neighborhood fixture. People expect to see it when they drive through. It's just a seasonal thing," David said, trying to keep his tone light. "We'll set it up again next spring." Patricia shook her head vigorously, causing her sun hat to tilt askew. "My grandchildren are visiting next weekend. They specifically mentioned wanting to see the pool." David couldn't recall ever seeing grandchildren at Patricia's house, but he kept that observation to himself. "I'm sorry about that, but they're welcome to come see it next summer. I need to get it stored before the weather turns." "Can't you just leave it up until next weekend?" Patricia pressed, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. "Just for a few more days?" "I've already started draining it," David explained, gesturing to the nearly empty liner. "And I've taken time off work specifically to do this today. Emma's sister is watching our kids so they don't get upset seeing it come down." Patricia's expression hardened again. "So you're prioritizing your convenience over community considerations?" "Patricia," David said, sighing quietly, "it's my pool on my property. I appreciate that you suddenly appreciate it, but it needs proper winter storage." "This is typical," Patricia hissed, her voice rising. "The selfishness in this neighborhood has reached unprecedented levels." "I'm sorry you feel that way," David replied, keeping his voice even. "But I need to finish this today." Patricia's face flushed crimson. She yanked her gardening gloves off and stuffed them into her pocket. "You're going to regret this, David Matthews. Mark my words." She spun on her heel, nearly losing her hat in the process, and stormed back toward her house. "Have a good afternoon," David called after her, more from habit than sincerity. He shook his head and returned to bailing out the remaining water, trying to make sense of the bizarre interaction. Had she been planning to photograph the pool for some new HOA complaint, or had she genuinely developed an attachment to the very thing she spent all summer protesting? Either way, David had a job to finish before Emma returned with the children. He dismissed Patricia's parting threat as typical neighborhood drama and continued with his task, completely unaware of what she was setting in motion inside her house. David had just finished folding the pool liner when he heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Thinking Emma had returned early with the children, he glanced toward the driveway only to freeze mid-motion. Two white police cruisers with the Oak Ridge Township insignia were pulling up, their light bars flashing but sirens silent. "What in the world?" David muttered, setting down the folded liner and wiping his hands on his jeans. The cruisers parked in tandem and two officers emerged. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair who moved with the deliberate confidence of someone who'd been on the force for decades. His nameplate read Ramirez. The second was a younger woman with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression professionally neutral. Her badge identified her as Officer Chen. David approached them with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Good afternoon, officers. Can I help you with something?" Officer Ramirez consulted a small notepad. "Mr. Matthews?" "David Matthews." "That's right," David confirmed, his mind racing through possibilities. Had there been an accident? Was something wrong with Emma and the kids? "We received a call about a disturbance at this address," Officer Chen explained, her eyes scanning the dismantled pool components spread across the yard. "Something about destruction of community property and water waste violations." David blinked, momentarily speechless. Then understanding dawned, and he felt a surge of both anger and disbelief. He glanced toward Patricia's house and spotted her silhouette in an upstairs window, watching. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding," David said carefully. "I'm simply taking down my family's pool for winter storage." Officer Ramirez's expression remained impassive, The caller was quite insistent that there was some sort of violation occurring, said something about community access rights and property value impacts. David ran a hand through his hair, struggling to maintain his composure. The pool is personal property that I purchased and installed on my private property. I have all the necessary HOA approvals and permits. Do you have documentation of ownership and those approvals? Officer Chen asked. Of course, David replied. They're in my home office. Would you like to see them? Officer Chen nodded. That would be helpful, sir. As David led them toward his front door, he noticed neighbors beginning to take notice. The Johnsons across the street had paused their gardening to watch. 2 doors down, Mr. Patel stood on his porch, phone in hand. Even the teenagers who usually ignored everything looked up from their skateboards at the end of the cul-de-sac. Inside, David retrieved a folder labeled Pool Documents from his meticulously organized filing cabinet. He had copies of the purchase receipt, warranty information, HOA approval form signed by the board president, and the county permit allowing the temporary structure. Here's everything, he said, passing the folder to Officer Ramirez. As you can see, all proper procedures were followed. As the officers reviewed the documents, David's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. On our way home. Kids had ice cream. All good? David typed quickly. Slight issue. Police here. We'll explain later. Don't worry. He added a thumbs-up emoji to reassure her, though he felt far from calm himself. These all appear to be in order, Officer Ramirez conceded, handing the folder back to David. But the complainant seemed very certain of her position. She mentioned something about a neighborhood beautification clause and common property rights. David sighed deeply. That would be my neighbor, Patricia Winters. She's been, let's say, interested in my pool since I installed it in May. Though I'm confused about why she's upset about me taking it down since she complained about it all summer. Just then, they heard the sound of a car door slamming outside, followed by rapid footsteps on the front walkway. Through the window, David could see Patricia marching toward his front door, a bulging folder clutched to her chest, her face set in grim determination. The sound of knuckles rapping sharply on the front door made all 3 people in David's living room turn. Officer Chen moved to answer it, revealing Patricia standing on the doorstep, slightly breathless and clutching her folder with white-knuckled intensity. Thank goodness you officers responded so promptly, Patricia said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I prepared all the relevant documentation. She glanced at David with a mixture of triumph and disdain before focusing on Officer Ramirez, clearly identifying him as the senior officer. I'm Patricia Winters, the reporting party. Officer Ramirez nodded professionally. Ma'am, we've reviewed Mr. Matthews' documentation and everything appears to be in order regarding his pool. Oh, that's just the surface, Patricia said, waving dismissively. There are deeper legal and community considerations at play. She patted her bulging folder. I've been documenting this situation all summer. David watched with growing disbelief as Patricia laid her folder on his coffee table and began extracting its contents with the flourish of a prosecutor presenting evidence. First came a stack of photographs, dozens of them, showing the Matthews pool from various angles and distances, all taken over their fence line. As you can see, Patricia said, spreading the photos in a fan pattern, this pool has been a fixture of our neighborhood landscape since May 14th at approximately 2:17 p.m., when installation was completed. Officer Chen examined a few photos, her expression carefully neutral. Ma'am, photographing into someone's backyard could potentially raise privacy concerns. Patricia ignored this comment and extracted her next piece of evidence, a sheet of paper with signatures. This is a petition signed by concerned residents who believe the pool constitutes a community amenity. David leaned forward to examine the document. There were indeed signatures, but a closer look revealed only 3 names. Patricia Winters herself, someone named Eleanor Higgins, whose handwriting looked suspiciously similar to Patricia's, and B. Smith scrawled illegibly. I've never met an Eleanor Higgins in our neighborhood, David said quietly. She's on Maple Court, Patricia replied quickly. Very concerned about neighborhood aesthetics. Officer Ramirez cleared his throat. Ms. Winters, what exactly is your complaint today? Mr. Matthews appears to have full rights to remove his own property from his yard. Patricia straightened up, reaching into her folder again. According to the Oak Ridge Estates Property Value Protection Clause, Section 7.3, removal of visible amenities that contribute to neighborhood desirability constitutes a form of property value vandalism. She produced a printout with highlighted passages, which Officer Chen accepted with visible skepticism. The document was titled Property Value Impact Analysis and featured a graph showing an 8% increase correlated with what appeared to be pool installation dates. I had my home professionally appraised in April and again in August, Patricia continued. The increase is directly attributable to the view of recreational facilities from my home office window. David couldn't contain himself any longer. Patricia, you complained about that pool constantly all summer. You said it was lowering property values. That was before I understood its full impact, Patricia replied smoothly. My research has since revealed its positive contribution to our neighborhood ecosystem. She produced another document, this one headed Municipal Code 147.8, Neighborhood Aesthetic Continuity Regulations. Certain passages were highlighted in neon yellow. This clearly states that once an outdoor feature has been established for over 90 days, it becomes part of the neighborhood character and cannot be removed without community consultation. Officer Ramirez accepted the document, skimming it with a furrowed brow. Ma'am, I've been with the Township Police for 23 years and I'm not familiar with this code. It's relatively obscure, Patricia admitted, but legally binding nonetheless. David looked over the officer's shoulder at the document. The formatting was inconsistent, and the header contained a subtle but unmistakable watermark, simplified legal template.